Thank you very much, Julie, and good afternoon, everybody, and thanks ever so much for joining us on this latest Yorkshire and Humber webinar. So we've had a bit of a summer break as a committee, but we're hoping to put together a really good programme of webinars moving forward over the next few months. We're going to try and organise a Christmas social event as well, so please look out for that. And also we're now in the process of planning sort of face-to-face meetings as well, hybrid meetings, so that we'll actually sort of broadcast our meetings. And so if you can't attend, then you'll be able to at least join us over the airwaves, so to speak. So that will be good. So please look out for that. Keep in touch with us on the social media. If you haven't actually already sort of started following us on the LinkedIn Yorkshire and Humber IIRSM branch, then please join in. And also we have a WhatsApp group as well for that. And also obviously keep up to date with IIRSM activities on the IIRSM website. Can I just ask as well, if anybody would like to volunteer to do a webinar in the future, then just please get in contact with us, with any of the committee. That will be great, either via the LinkedIn again or via the WhatsApp. So yeah, well, the more the merrier. Right, just without further ado, I just want to introduce Billy Cunningham, who's very kindly volunteered with an arm up his back from me to do a presentation for us today. A lot of stuff happening. Well, it's the biggest thing, I think, probably in sort of legislation that's coming on board, you know, in the next few months and so years or whatever it is, however long the time frame is, but it seems to be a long time coming, all this kind of stuff. So there's an awful lot of activity and questions around this. And Billy is absolutely a leading expert in fire safety, generally looks after a portfolio of properties valued at around 12 billion quid, so including places like the Trinity Shopping Centre, White Rose Shopping Centre, Junction 32, all in Yorkshire, of course, as well as loads of expensive buildings in London of mixed use, so they've got residential and offices and retail. So he has a big job looking after the fire safety in all those buildings, and as I say, is an expert in this area, so I'm very grateful to him for giving up his time to come and have a chat with us today. If you have any questions, please send them on into the box whenever you see fit, and what I will do is I will work through them all and then sort of pass them on to Billy at the end of the session, if that's all right, and hopefully we'll get through as many as we possibly can. But I'm going to hand this over to Billy now to do his stuff. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rob. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, I'm Billy Cunningham. I'm the Fire Safety Director for Landsec. Landsec is the UK's largest landlord of commercial property, not necessarily residential property, but just considered as the UK's largest landlord in its entirety. As Rob said, portfolio of around 12 billion current valuation, which is a mixture of residential, office, commercial buildings and retail. So what I wanted to do with this session today was the Building Safety Act and other fire safety legislation, such as the Fire Safety England regulations that have come in. It's a huge amount of information to get through in kind of an hour's time. But what I wanted to do was try where I could to give you the main points that I think would affect people who work within the built environment, whether that's on development side or whether that's in actual operations and operating the building, of both the Building Safety Act and the Fire Safety England regulation. So we're going to run through a bit of an overview of the Act itself, the key kind of takeaways that I would like you to kind of look out for in the future. If you've got people who are giving you competent fire safety advice, they should be lining you up for how these changes are going to impact on you. There's some additional duty holders in there, and finally the Fire Safety England regulations. It's all really around operational control of buildings through the fire safety order, but we'll run through that. If anybody at the end of this would like the slides, I've deliberately put quite a bit of information. Normally I just kind of bullet point things on slides so that there's not too much to read through, but I'll obviously do the reading for you, but the idea behind that is that if anybody wishes to take away the slides, I'll make them available to Rob at the end of this, and then you've got plenty of information there to kind of run through. Okay. So the Building Safety Act, and a bit of a summary of the Act. It received royal assent on the 28th of April 2022, and much of the Act requires secondary legislation to bring the provisions into force. So what we've got is the initial Building Safety Act and a number of sections and a number of clauses within there that requires some form of secondary legislation to tell us how to implement those broader requirements of the Act. The Act's provisions will extend and apply in the main to England only, and the Act establishes a new building safety regulator, which is one of the main things to come out of the Act, and it sets out the objections and the functions of that building safety regulator. The building safety regulator itself has been named as the Health and Safety Executive. However, we think that the building safety regulator, from their briefings, is going to include a number of other core participants. So they may have people from building control, they may have people from fire service, and in its entirety we're looking at about 700 people, and they started recruiting really kind of the middle of last year. They've got head of the building safety regulator now in post, and they're making their way through recruitment at this moment in time. The changes to the building regulations in clause 32 of the Building Safety Act will enable building control procedures for building works on buildings that are not in scope for the new regime for higher risk buildings to be improved. So what that means is that whilst this Building Safety Act primarily looks at high risk buildings, that's buildings over 18 metres or 7 stories, the idea is that the trickle down effect and certain applications will apply to other buildings outside of that scope. Details of what is proposed were set out in the draft Building Appointment Persons, Industry Competence and Duty Holders regulations, but these are currently withdrawn and being revised in preparation for public consultation later this year. I actually sit on the Building Property Federation sounding board, where we're feeding into that consultation process at the minute. So an overview of the Act itself and breaking it down into the parts. The Building Safety Act comprises of 6 parts, and it's got 9 schedules, primarily devised to ensure that the safety of people in buildings and to improve the safety standards within construction. As I'm sure all of you are aware, that this was born really out of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and once we started to look seriously at how that building was constructed, and we started to look at the wider construction industry and fire safety management in construction and managing products, materials, and adherence to building regulations and the functional requirements of those building regulations, we realized that there was a big problem, which we've been, as an industry, we've been working our way through, making the remediations at vast cost to initially at vast cost to the taxpayer, but now a lot of building developers have actually refunded that money back to the Building Safety Fund, and they've paid for the remediations themselves in full. So part 1 of the Act, that provides an overview of the Act itself. Part 2 establishes the new building safety regulator within the Health and Safety Executive and sets out its functions in relation to buildings within England. So that's its functions in terms of enforcement and its duties and how far those duties extend. Part 3 amends the Building Act 1984 as it applies to England and Wales, and defines the scope and provisions for prescribed appointments to be made in relation to any building work to which building regulations apply, the competence requirements to be imposed on any appointed person or any prescribed person that's part of that project, the regime during the design and construction phase for high risk buildings, which is altered slightly. There's more requirements on statutory notifications, and there's going to be gateways imposed, which I'm going to go through later on in the presentation. and the registration of building inspectors and building control approvers. So that whole building control model that we've currently got is under review, and again, through the British Property Federation and the Sounding Board and some other industry groups, we're feeding into that consultation. It's a public consultation, so anybody can actually get onto that and put across their ideas of how building control could be improved, and how the building inspectors and building controlled approvers can be improved, or approved inspectors. So breaking it down slightly into different sections. This section we're looking at the Building Safety Regulator. So the HSE will head up the Building Safety Regulator, and it's got three main functions. It's to lead the delivery of new, more stringent regulatory regime for high-rise buildings which are within scope. So that's high-rise buildings that are 18 metres or above, or 7 stories. It's to promote competence for all buildings, including industry and professionals working on buildings and building control bodies, and finally provide oversight for the safety and performance of all buildings. Building Safety Regulator will operate proportionately and will be an evidence-led regulator. We've had that from briefings from the head of Building Safety Regulator, and it aims to re-establish confidence in the system so that residents are safe and also feel safe in their homes. So the Building Safety Regulator is a key part of this. One of the main issues that we've got, or we perceive as an industry though, is resource. The current planning approval cycle, which involves other statutory consultees, is currently quite cumbersome, and the Building Safety Regulator will be effectively part of the process now. And we'll have to jump through hoops at certain gateways, and there could be what are called hard stops placed on developments, new developments. So it'll be interesting to see. What resource we've got, and if that causes any issues. So we keep talking about higher risk buildings. Well, higher risk buildings are defined within the Building Safety Act, and they're defined as a building which are at least 18 metres in height or 7 stories. So that's what defines a high risk building. So when we keep referring to high risk buildings and the application of the Building Safety Act in relation to them, this is what we mean. So the gateways that I talked about that may present us as an industry, if we're a developer or if we work within the construction industry, these are what we're talking about, and they could potentially providing, well, if they're managed correctly and resourced correctly, I can't see it being a problem. I think we all agree that the sentiment is great, but what we'll have to do is we'll have to see how they're implemented and what bottlenecks that causes. So Gateway 1 is already actually in force. It came into force through the Town and Country Planning Act. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'll just give you a summary. So Gateway 1, the planning stage, applicants will need to demonstrate that fire safety matters have been taken into account in broad terms. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but they do have to show that you've considered fire safety for the whole development. Gateway 2, there will be a hard stop on construction, which cannot begin unless the regulator has approved the application process. And Gateway 3 would be at completion of construction, there'll be a hard stop on occupation to allow the regulator to carry out final inspections and issue a completion certificate. So that's effectively, once you've built the building and you're achieving PC, practical completion, and you're going to move into occupation, they need to know that you've got all of your checks and balances in place, all of the information for that operator to then move in and operate the building safely. Gateway 1 came into force 1st of August 2021 through the Town and Country Planning Act, and it basically requires us to consider fire safety matters and make sure they're incorporated into the planning stage for high risk buildings, and we do that in the form of a fire safety statement. The HSE is a statutory consultee at this stage, and submissions of the fire safety statement will be required when seeking planning approval for any new higher risk building. Gateways 2 and 3 will require secondary legislation to be in place before they're fully implemented. This currently sits within the draft building, higher risk buildings England regulations, and these will set out the proposed time limits for the regulator to perform its statutory duties, and perform statutory duties, in relation to work involving construction of high risk buildings. So what we mean there is that there will be set timescales by which they should be reviewing your planning applications and reviewing your full building design approval. Currently that sets 12 weeks in theory, but again, we're looking for some clarity around how that would work. You know, are we submitting full approvals, waiting 12 weeks, getting feedback on any changes, alterations they need, and then that clock starts again? Or are we in constant dialogue through that 12-week process? Is there any scope for early engagement like we do with the fire service currently? So it's a little bit up in the air, but again, gateways 2 and 3 do require that secondary legislation, so hopefully that will be ironed out in the future. Those draft building, higher risk building regulations will also include some information on work to existing buildings that causes it to become a high risk building. So that could be, you could extend your stories, and that would then bring you into scope for a high risk building. You could also conduct some additional work which brings it into scope through material change. Gateway 2 is designed to be a hard stop, requiring a fully developed building control application to be approved before commencement on site can begin. Detailed information may include the competency of the principal contractor and principal designer, and that involves signing up to a competency statement where you, as the accountable person or the principal accountable person for that project, will state, yes, this principal designer, principal contractor are competent to undertake those duties. It's a little, to be honest, it's a little bit like we do with CDM regulations at the minute. You know, it's down to the client to prove competency, and you do that via a number of means, skills, knowledge, experience. However, there is some documents which I'm going to go through later which actually assist us with this. So British Standards Institute have put out some documents around competencies for the different core participants in a project, and we'll run through that a little bit later. Also, the description of works and a detailed plan of works, construction control plan describing how building safety will be maintained during construction. So they're looking at this currently, not only designing safety into the building, but also how that building is going to remain safe through the construction phase. The design and build approach, the fire and emergency file, arrangements for the capture and maintenance of golden thread information. We'll go through golden thread shortly, and a planning statement from Gateway 1. So that's effectively just duplicating some or pulling across some information from Gateway 1. So as you can see there, Gateway 2, there's quite a lot to consider prior to putting in that fully developed building plans approval. Details of any proposed partial completion should also be included. So potentially, if you've got a mixed use development and as it's going up, you may achieve PC on different elements of the building as you go up. So you'll have to plan that in at this stage. What the building safety regulator don't want you to do is come to them and say, oh, we've finished the retail section at the bottom of this mixed use development. Can we open it? It needs to be a fully thought through, fully planned procedure, because things like life safety systems, sprinklers, fire alarm systems need to have been planned in and need to be fully operational prior to getting to that point. So it is going to change the way that we think about buildings. It just means that we're shifting a lot of some of the thinking that we did later on in the REBA stages. We'll now do at a much earlier stage. The regulators also proposed a 12-week period to approve or reject these building control applications. As I said before, currently there's only about 250 to 300 people recruited for the building safety regulator, but they are looking at stepping up to 700 and maybe more. It'll be interesting to see once these once the building safety regulator starts to go through the application processes and how that 12-week time period is impacted. We currently get a 12-week time period for turnarounds from London Fire Brigade, for instance, but we know that due to resource issues that sometimes gets extended out to, and we've experienced, as long as 25 weeks. So that can have a serious impact, and especially where with other statutory consultees currently, we can have concurrent activity on site, which doesn't stop a site in its tracks or a development in its tracks. However, if this is a hard stop, it could be a little bit stop-start, and it could impact on developments massively. In general, the Building Safety Act will probably increase the cost of building, just because you developers are going to have to protect themselves, contractors are going to have to protect themselves from these stop and starts. You know, if you've got a 200 person site and then all of a sudden the hard stop kicks in, what do you do with those 200 people? You know, they're planned in for a certain duration, so it makes it very difficult to plan works. Gateway 3 is intended to provide assurance that the building is safe for occupation and requires the issue of a completion certificate from the regulator. Some of you may be old enough to remember fire certificates from the previous 1997 fire regulations. It's a little bit like that. Effectively, what we have to do is we have to present the golden thread of information that's been captured through the construction project on any items that are going to keep that building safe, and we have to make sure, or we have to present evidence that we have gathered that information in such a format that it's easy to understand, and we've passed that information on to the building occupier that's coming in. This will include things like commissioning fire risk assessments, commissioning evidence, test evidence, but it all needs to be in a format that is usable for that end user. That golden thread of information is really key to managing the building safely. There's lots and lots of O&M information in there. So if you say, for instance, you get a breakdown in your smoke control system, then what is the redundancy to that system? What are the implications of that system going down? Is there anybody that you need to notify when that goes down, such as the fire service? How long do you get before you need to notify them? All these things can be pushed across into the operational management of the building, and then once that's been handed over, the responsibility for maintaining that golden thread of information then sits with the building operator. Yeah, so I went a bit off piece there, so I won't read that verbatim, but essentially that's what we're talking about. There's a proposed 12-week period for the regulator to approve the application for a completion certificate. Again, resource dependent. We're going to have to see what the demand is on resources and how many people are competent to undertake that role of actually signing off a completion certificate for the building safety regulator. High-risk buildings cannot be occupied unless a completion certificate and the building is registered with the regulator. So again, it's a hard stop. You could end up at the end of your practical completion period with a number of weeks where the building is effectively sitting empty because we have to go through this new process. So the golden thread, as I've kind of alluded to, the information and documents required through the gateways will form part of the golden thread information. Essentially, the golden thread information will be the information about a building that enables a building operator to keep the building safe. The information needs to be accurate, it needs to be easily understandable and up to date, readily accessible. There's lots and lots of different ways to do this. There's lots of people out there selling different pieces of software. You may even have your own software currently that could be used to do this. The issue we're finding at the minute is what do we stipulate and how do we stipulate software to be used, and the format in which we receive from the principal contractor that information. You know, a lot of the time on plans we call rooms, compartments, we call them something else in the construction phase, and then when they get moved into operational phase they get different names, and it's how do you keep track of that renaming policy? How do you keep track of your naming convention of files so that you can update information? How do you lock down who can update that information? There's quite a lot to consider in the common data environment, which is effectively the digital repository that you will use for all of this information. What you don't want to achieve, or what you don't want to get yourself into a position of being in a position where you've got 2 or 3 areas where this information is kept. There should be one area where any updates can be completed, and then anybody accessing that information has that version of the truth. If you have 2 or 3 different places where you store this information, you could have you could be 2 versions behind. You could be working off incomplete information. So as I said, there's lots and lots of ways to do it. You've just really got to decide what is best for you. Standard duty holders apply throughout the construction project. So we've got CDM duty holders, you've got the principal contractor, principal designer, client. They will apply, but additional duty holders have been identified within the Building Safety Act themselves. So you've got accountable persons and the principal accountable person. The Act defines an accountable person as someone who holds the legal estate in possession of any part of the common parts, or does not hold a legal estate in any part of the building, but who is under a relevant repairing obligation in relation to any part of those common parts. So you could have multiple accountable persons within one building. So you could have a landlord that's responsible for the landlord areas. You could have a leaseholder that's responsible for areas that they have under their leasehold. You could have the building management company, where through contract you've delegated certain responsibilities. The developer, prior to handing it over, and actually the developer keeps hold of certain rights for potentially up to 30 years after construction. And the contractor themselves, at different parts during the building going up, different duty holders, different accountable persons will come in and maybe drop off. But as long as they're aware that they are a duty holder, because you are a duty holder by virtue of the fact that you've built something, or you hold a repairing obligation for that. So it's not like you would appoint somebody. As soon as you give somebody a repairing obligation for that part of the building or that element of the building, they are an accountable person. As it says at the bottom there, it is possible to have different accountable persons for each part of a high-risk building, and the Act does not seek to impose any limits on how many accountable persons there may be. Which brings us on to the next duty holder, which is the principal accountable person. So unlike the accountable person, there will only be one person who occupies the role of principal accountable person. This role effectively gives somebody overall responsibility for ensuring that building safety risks are being managed appropriately, and that the various duty obligations are being complied with. You would effectively be, it's similar to in an operational building where the fire safety order applies, Article 22, under coordination and cooperation. If you've got more than one duty holder sharing the premises, you effectively have to have a lead duty holder that can pull all of that information together and make sure the duties are complied with by the other duty holders. I'm just going to skip back one, because I'm just going to run through a couple of duties and obligations imposed on the accountable person. So this could be one person, it could be many persons. And when we talk about a person as well, we're not necessarily talking about an individual. It could be a management company, it could be, you know, a body corporate, but that body corporate would have to identify for certain buildings, you know, an identified person that looks after that particular building. But most of these accountable persons, principal accountable persons, will probably be legal entities. So once you've established that an accountable person, there will be a number of obligations and duties imposed upon them, including ensuring that a completion certificate has been issued prior to occupation of their particular area, because we talked about you could get phased practical completion, so you may end up with a number of completion certificates, and the scope of that completion certificate would just be for that particular area. Duties to both assess and manage building safety risks, comply with mandatory reporting requirements to the building safety regulator, keeping prescribed information and prescribed standards and keeping that information up to date for your particular area, and responding to residents' requests for information, which is a big part of the building safety bill. Now, duties of the principal accountable person include registering the building with the building safety regulator, applying for a building assessment from the building regulator, applying for a building assessment certificate once that assessment's been completed, displaying the assessment certificate in a prominent location, preparing a safety case report. And the safety case report is slightly different to the Gateway one. The safety case report is all about how you're going to manage the building safely. Establish and operate a mandatory occurrence reporting into the building safety regulator, and they're also responsible, and this is I think one of the most important parts, responsible for preparing resident engagement strategy and establishing a complaints procedure for that particular building. Going on to some of the issues that we perceive with the Building Safety Act itself. These aren't all of them. I could go on all day. There's things that are yet to be ironed out, but one of them is the building safety regular resource and the implications on the gateway system. Putting in hard stops is a great way to go to ensure that everything's bottomed out before you move on to the next stage, and it's been that way in Scotland for a while. However, it's just a resource issue. We already experience resource issues in the current planning arrangements with statutory consultancies such as the fire brigade, so we're just hoping that there's enough resource there for the demand that's coming down the track. Competency statement, so there's a requirement on the accountable person, principal accountable person, to put forward a competency statement in the design stage, and effectively you've got to do that before you start on site. But in D&B world, you may not have selected your contractor at that stage, so you effectively, what you may have to do, and we're still seeking clarification on this if it's okay, but you may have to show that the people you are tendering to, so say you're tendering to 3-5 organisations, that all of them are competent to undertake that type of work, and then it doesn't matter who you select because you've evidenced how you've gone about assessing that competency. But luckily there's a number of documents out there that help us that have just been released in August. You've got BSI Flex 8670, which is more the it's kind of a strategy on how you go about assessing competence, but they've actually broken down under the publicly accessible specifications 867172 and 8673, that should be, sorry, at the bottom. You've got principal designer competency, principal contractor competency, and the competency for those managing the safety of buildings. So the BSI, under direction of the government, have established this, so that should help massively with that. And the other issue potentially with the Building Safety Act is generally an increased cost of construction and potentially much longer times to develop these buildings. So that is the Building Safety Act overview. I know it felt like quite a quite a lot of information all at once, but it's a big subject to cover in an hour, and I've still got the Fire Safety England regulations to a quick whistle stop to tour through that. As a final slide, I've taken this from an APS document, the Association of Project Safety, and this is a timeline of the Building Safety Act and what's coming in. So for those of you who do want this information, I will attach the APS document to it as well. It's a freely available document, so there's no problems there with copyright or anything, and it's in there, and there's quite a lot more detail in that document about the building safety bill itself. But as you can see, we gained royal assent here in the Building Safety Act 2022, gave royal assent 28th of April, and then from this point on you can see that there's going to be a number of stages, a number of pieces of secondary legislation that need to come in, and we're probably not going to be hitting full implementation of the Building Safety Act until the middle of 2024. But it is something that there's so much change. Probably one of the biggest pieces of legislation change or impact of legislation change to our industry in since the 1974 Act. So it's something that we need to get across. And if you need help in understanding it and you need assistance, now's the time to get it, because every man and his dog is looking for that same assistance. So yeah, so just try and get ahead of the game. So briefly on to Fire Safety England regulations. So this is more to do with operational. So we've talked about the Building Safety Act, and that's more to do with the development of buildings and then managing those new developments. But what the Fire Safety England regulations do is it's a new legislative requirement, and at present only applies to England, and it's been introduced through Article 24 of the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order. These regulations will make it a requirement in law for the responsible person of high-rise blocks of flats to provide information to the Fire and Rescue Service to assist them and to plan and, if needed, provide an effective operational response to that building. Also, the regulations will require responsible persons in multiple occupied residential buildings, which are high-rise buildings, as well as those above 11 metres in height, to provide additional fire safety measures. And we're going to run through those now. So I'm going to break this down, and you'll see over to the left where I put high-rise requirements, and then there's other requirements. So if you just have a look over there, you'll see which requirements apply to which buildings. So in high-rise residential buildings over 18 metres or 7 stories, the responsible persons will be required to do the following. So building plans. They'll be required to provide their local fire and rescue service with up-to-date electronic building plans, and to place a hard copy of these plans alongside a single-page building plan which identifies key firefighting equipment in secure information boxes on site. So this applies less to buildings that have got things like 24-hour security, 24-hour concierge, because you've got an actual person there who can liaise with the fire service and show them the plans and provide them with that digital information. Where a lot of buildings don't have that that concierge service, or don't have that 24-hour security presence due to the way that their service charge is structured, and it may be high-rise block of flats that's local authority block of flats or something like this, but it applies to all blocks of flats. There will generally need to be a fire service box. We are currently going down the route of installing girder boxes because they're extremely robust, extremely secure, and the fire service, there's a special key to insert, and all fire service personnel carry that key on their appliance. So it means that we're not having to kind of give them extra keys or key codes and things like that. They all carry this special key, insert it, and then they've got access to all that information. External wall systems. So the responsible person will be required to provide their local fire and rescue service with information about the design and materials of high-rise buildings' external wall system, and to inform the fire and rescue service of any material change to these walls. Also, they will be required to provide information in relation to the level of risk that the design and materials of the external wall structure gives rise to and the mitigation steps taken. So in a nutshell, the way to do this is via the PAS 9980 inspections on external walls, and that will give you a report that will give you all the information that the fire service would potentially need. It will give you a breakdown of what's in there in terms of materials. It will give you the risk prior to conducting any mitigating measures or prior to conducting any remediation, and then once you've conducted that remediation, you'll have a residual risk, and it will highlight the kind of main areas of risk for the fire service. But if you're doing it correctly and you're conducting external wall system investigations correctly and the remediation process, there should be very little residual risk, but still need to inform the fire service of that. Again, this is for high-rise buildings, so lifts and other key firefighting equipment. So there's a requirement to undertake monthly checks on the operation of lifts intended for the use by firefighters. So that's firefighters' lifts, and also any evacuation lifts. Evacuation lifts are not as common as firefighting lifts, but there is, especially in the London area, there's London Plan D5B5 or B5D5, which requires new buildings to incorporate evacuation lifts alongside firefighting lifts. So it is going to become more prevalent. They will also be required to report any defects, any defective lifts or equipment to their local fire and rescue service as soon as possible after the detection of the fault, and if it cannot be fixed within 24 hours. So effectively, if you've got a firefighter lift, the key thing about a firefighter lift is it was placed there as part of the planning application to enable firefighters to use that piece of equipment to get to a bridgehead at a location without taking all of their stuff up some stairs. So it's a specific lift designed for the purpose of use of firefighter. So if it's down and you've got a 30-40 story building, the fire service is going to need to know about that operationally. So you've got a 24-hour window in which to conduct any repairs. If it's going to extend beyond that through supply chain issues or lead times for spares, then they need to be informed about that so that they can make plans should that building go up. Information boxes. We need to install and maintain secure information boxes in the building. This box must contain the name, contact detail of the responsible person, hard copies of the building, floor plans, wayfinding. Sorry, that should be a separate. Wayfinder signage is separate. So information boxes, as I said previously, we're using girder boxes. If you've got staff there, you can speak to the fire service about the requirement of do you need an information box, because if you've always got a presence there, it seems like an expense that you don't really need. Wayfinding signage, so we need to install visible wayfinding signage that's going to be visible in low light or smoky conditions, that identifies flat and floor numbers in the stairwell. So that's to assist the fire service in being able to identify which way to go in the event that the stairwell gets smoke clogged. So one of the issues, it's kind of an issue, but with firefighting in the UK, potentially as they move from the bridgeheads and start attacking the fire, they'll move from a relatively smoke-free environment in the stairwell. They'll crack open the door and potentially, depending on how many floors they're fighting fires on, it may overwhelm the system. But what we found from the Grenfell inquiry was that there was really confusing signage, and in some cases no signage at all, which indicated to the firefighters where they were getting fire survival guidance calls from. So if somebody was ringing up saying that they're in flat 224, it was really difficult to find their way to flat 224. So this is a new requirement. So now in buildings over the height of 11 meters, there's going to be a requirement. So that's all buildings over the height of 11 meters, including high rises. So as you go up, there's now a requirement to undertake annual checks of flat entrance doors and quarterly checks of all other fire doors and common parts. So the fire doors and common parts will belong to the landlord anyway, so you should be doing your fire safety checks on those fire door checks on those, but there's now a requirement to undertake annual checks of flat entrance doors. Again, there's a bit of an issue here because the government have given out a fact sheet giving some advice on how to do this, because it's going to be extremely difficult. You're dealing with individuals, you're dealing with property that's effectively theirs, and without their assistance, you're not going to be able to get in and undertake a good fire door assessment. So what you've got to do is effectively record how you've tried to get in. So if you've got 200 doors in a building and you managed to only inspect 150 within that year, you've got to show how you've tried to communicate with residents, how you've tried to get in there and check that. But essentially, the government are suggesting that you've got to make best endeavours. We've asked for a little bit more clarity around what best endeavours mean, but effectively, if you've tried numerous occasions, you've tried leaflet dropping, you've tried knocking on the door, you've tried all these different things, as long as you can evidence that you've done that and recorded that you've done it and when you've done it, then that's your best endeavours. And then in all multi-occupied residential buildings with 2 or more sets of domestic premises, so this is effectively everything with 2 or more premises, there's a requirement now for, well, there always was a requirement, but there's an additional emphasis placed on fire safety instructions. So that's providing relevant fire safety instructions to their residents, which will include instructions on how to report a fire and any other instructions which set out what residents must do once a fire has occurred based on the evacuation strategy of the building. The difficulty in this, certainly we're finding, is a lot of our properties are in London, people from all over the world there. So safety instructions may need to be in multiple languages. You may need to deliver safety instructions in different formats to make sure that it's landing with everybody. It's no good just kind of writing it in English, posting it up in the lobby and saying that's it, I've ticked that box. You've really got to make the extra effort there to make sure that the residents within that building fully understand what they need to do in the event of an emergency. And also fire door information, so that's providing residents with information relating to how important their fire doors are. You might want to include in there also some basic checks that they can do and explain about certain defects. So if their door doesn't close on the automatic close, things like that, that they should be reporting these things so that they can help as a second pair of eyes, so that you're not just relying on that annual check. And then finally, because that's quite a lot of information to take in, the National Fire Chiefs Council have helpfully come up with an infographic which helps you understand it. So if you think about this in 3 columns, so columns on your left, that's all residential buildings with 2 or more domestic premises now require fire risk assessment prioritization tool, which there's a link on the NFCC website. But as long as you're conducting your fire risk assessments, you're covered from a legal point of view. However, the fire risk assessment prioritization tool is can be worked into your fire safety management for these types of buildings. We need to provide information to residents on fire safety instructions and information to residents on fire doors. So that applies to all buildings with 2 or more domestic premises. Then the next column down, you need to include 1, 2, and 3 from this column on your left, plus you now need to include fire door checks. So that's on buildings between 11 meters and 17.9 meters in height. And then at the far right, you've got residential buildings over 18 meters or 7 stories. You include from the previous columns 1, 2, 3, and 4, plus secure information boxes, design and materials of the external wall, floor plans and building plans, lifts and firefighting equipment, and wayfinding signage. So that's I find that's quite a useful infographic from the NFCC, which it just simplifies things and it makes it much clearer to understand. So I'll take a breath now and get a drink, but any questions from the floor are fully welcomed.
Well done, Billy. Thank you. Wow, there's a lot of stuff there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
And lots of increased bureaucracy for those involved in the construction of buildings moving forward. And it looks like a lot of new jobs as well that's going to be advertised. What kind of worries me is all the resources that are going to be required for this. And I think you said about increasing costs and stuff, and also recruiting all these inspectors is going to take some time, isn't it? And sorting out the competence and everything. So there's quite a lot yet to still happen. But I think it's great that we, to get a bit of a heads up on this now and a good running on all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think
who are involved in it.
Some of the costs as well are kind of hidden. So when I talk about competency around certain individuals, we've also got a bit of a competency issue around those conducting workmanship on site. So if I take fire doors as an example, we're now implementing specialist clerk of works for fire door packages. So way back when, say, 7, 8, 9 years ago, you may have included a clerk of works for the overall project, and they're really there to control quality of work on site and make sure that the building site is going up in accordance with your specification. But they may not be an expert on certain things. And what we're finding is that we have in the past, actually in recent past, had buildings completed where the fire doors have been installed incorrectly, and it wasn't spotted until we'd gained occupation of the building. So now there's an additional level of coverage in there, so that somebody's looking at how these are installed. But that's an additional level of cost, through a project. It might be 65,000, 70,000 pounds a year for a clerk of works, and you may have a 2-year project. That's another 140,000 pounds, and then you may have a similar role for fire dampers and a similar role for something else. So but that's what we need to do to make sure that we're getting the most accurate information, and the building's being built correctly. So yeah, it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, there's loads of questions, as I suspected there might be. So I'm just going to try and flick through them. Apologies if we don't get to everybody on all these questions. Just probably quite a simple one to start with. Is the building safety information box different from the fire safety documents box?
Yeah, it's the same thing effectively, but the requirements are more detailed now. So there's an NFCC document that's been brought out in conjunction with the FPA and the FIA, I think, which is a really good document, and it tells you how you should be marking up your plans with standard legends, what information should go in there. But effectively, the box is, it's a fire safety documents information box, and as long as it's in a prominent location that the fire service can access, what should go in there. In fact, that's another document that I'll include. I'll send to you, Rob. So if you want to send this out or make it available, that document on what information should go in it, it's a really, really good document. But yeah, it's effectively it's the same thing.
Right, brilliant. If a building requires an evacuation lift, firefighters lift, and at least 2 lifts for the residents, it will be in total 4 lifts minimum. Is this not going to go in contradiction of the environmental and sustainability policies? Well, I guess that's a comment.
So there's London Plan B5D5, which normally London kind of lead with a lot of these things. Then it's because they've just got so many high-rise buildings. But there's a requirement in there for new buildings now to have a firefighter's lift and an evacuation lift that is separate to a passenger lift. So yeah, so you are right, and we have pushed back with a lot of these questions, and we haven't. They're kind of letting industry decide the best way to manage this. But one of the key things in residential buildings that we've come up as a problem is evacuation lifts need driving. Somebody needs to be in there to drive them, because initially lifts will all ground as per the cause and effects of the fire system in the building. So somebody has to go in there and physically drive that lift. If you're in a residential building without any concierge and without any members of staff that are 24 hours, how does that happen? What's the implication on the service charge? Do we now need a person to just sit around waiting for a fire to happen? There's lots of things that are not fully explored yet. But luckily, whilst we need to plan for these things, we personally haven't built any buildings yet that where we've needed to implement that, and it's been a problem. But yeah, there's lots of questions that are not answered yet.
Yeah. Another comment here. Thanks, Billy. Really interesting. How will these regs affect existing building refurbs? And also, has there been any clarification on competency requirements for duty holders?
Yes. Well, there was a British standard out around duty holders that got brought out. However, some duty holders have been removed, such as the building safety manager has been removed from the Building Safety Act as it was enacted. So the only guidance out there currently on duty holders are the ones for the principal designer, principal contractor, and I think if you're talking about existing buildings, probably the PAS around the management of fire safety in buildings. They're all freely available at the minute. If you go to the British Standards website, you can download all three of them free of charge. Usually they're about £120, I think. So get out there and download them. But yeah, there's some competency criteria in there. It's fairly broad. However, it is quite helpful if you don't have a starting point. In terms of how these are going to affect existing buildings, so there's a requirement in the Building Safety Act for developers to take responsibility for buildings that they've either previously developed and sold on within a 30-year period, where there is known fire safety defects, and you've basically built it otherwise in accordance with the building regulations or the functional requirements B1 to B5. And there's also a requirement for any buildings that you've been involved in a major refurbishment, just in case you've introduced fire safety issues to that building. So any buildings that you've previously built and sold, if you're a developer, you've kind of got to put them on your watch list and look out, and you may even want to reach out to the current owners and establish some sort of inspection at the building to make sure you're not on the hook for anything. And any buildings that you've refurbished. Existing buildings, you are going to have to retrospectively try and gather this information. So we've experienced that a lot of our older buildings, O&M information, what would be considered building regulation 38 information, so that's information relating to fire safety for buildings. A lot of that was paper. It's not much use, to be honest. This information needs to be in digital format now, so we're starting to think about historically how do we go back and convert that information into digital format. Where the information's missing, there's a responsibility or a kind of duty on us to fill that information gap. So if you've got hold of not a historical building, but if you've got a hold of a building that doesn't have that information readily available, then you're going to have to come up with a strategy of how to do that, and also foot the costs somehow.
Wow. When will fire risk assessment guides be updated, if you've got any idea about
that? I'm presuming that you're meaning the older guides from the department for what was the Department for Communities and Local Housing, I think it was.
I guess.
Yeah, so there is fire risk assessment guidance that has been updated from the British Standards Institute, which is PAS 79-1. That was updated last year. That's out, and there's a PAS 79-2 which is currently withdrawn, and I think they're going to republish it. And what they've done is they've broken. There used to be a PAS 79, and it encompassed all buildings that were that applicable under the fire safety order. But now what they've done is they've tried to split the PAS into commercial premises and residential premises. So PAS 79-2, when it's re-released, will be specifically guidance on how to complete fire risk assessments in residential. Now, the government guidance, I would imagine, once they've finalised, the sticking point appears to be around the evacuation of disabled people and how that's tackled. It's always a difficult thing in residential buildings because generally you're not staffed like you are in commercial buildings. So it's quite a nuanced area of conducting a person-centered risk assessment. However, it's not impossible, and we should still be doing it. In my opinion, some people have got a different opinion. So I think once that's tackled and once that is re-released, I would imagine that they will then look at updating fire risk assessment guidance. The current fire risk assessment guidance, however, because it's based on general solid principles of risk assessing, the current guidance is it's solid. You could still refer to those guidance and it'd still be a useful document. But there's other people out there that are providing good quality fire risk assessment CPD and good quality fire risk assessment courses, which are now actually starting to specialise on residential blocks, so that you can really kind of hone in on the risk, HMOs, residential blocks and stuff like that. So I'd keep an eye out for those kind of providers.
Yeah, good shout. Is there a template available for registering buildings already in occupation?
Not that I'm aware. So the requirement for registering buildings isn't yet in force, and I'm sure that the Building Safety Regulator it'll probably be done via a digital portal, I would imagine. And I think initially the requirement for a building certificate and registering the building will be for new build. They'll probably end up with two. So you'll register the new buildings because that starts a process, a defined process where you've got to get a building assessment and then a building certificate, register the building and then display the certificate. Whereas with existing buildings, the only requirement currently is to have a fire risk assessment, a valid fire risk assessment there, and obviously make sure that other compliance items are met. But yeah, I think there'll probably be two elements of the portal. So you'll register existing buildings that are high risk along with your fire risk assessment and other fire safety documentation, and then the new ones will go through the new kind of gateway and stepped process.
Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to make this the last question. I'm just conscious of the time. But will the Building Safety Regulator oversee the building control generally? Will they take over from building control inspectors and stuff?
So again, it's not been 100% explained. The Building Safety Act, it appears that the Building Safety Regulator will take over the building control element of higher risk buildings. So there'll still be building control doing their normal function, but specifically higher risk buildings, anything over 18 meters, will go via the Building Safety Regulator, and there will be building control functions in there. And actually in section 2 of the Building Safety Act, it explains that the Building Safety Regulator is not only responsible for the competency of their staff, but they're also going to be responsible for the competency of building, of raising the competency of building control as a whole. So I would imagine that the Building Safety Regulator, as the higher risk buildings are coming into them, they will have novated some people from either the local authority building control or approved inspectors in the same way that they're going to novate some staff from fire and rescue service, and it's going to be a multidisciplinary organisation, so that the building control element will go through Building Safety Regulator building control.
It's going to be quite a big extension of the HSE, isn't it? Really, it's going to be expanding their role quite a lot.
yeah, it's huge. And when you look at the personnel required as well, 700 people that they announced in the middle of last year, to recruit 700 people with the right competencies as well.
Absolutely.
And the irony is we're all looking for those people, so we're all fighting over the same pool. So
yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. Right, well, I think we'd better call it a day just because we've run over a bit of time. Julie, is there anything to say from your end? if you're there.
Just to thank Billy. I've never seen anyone cover such a large amount of information coherently in such a short amount of time. You obviously know your stuff.
Well, I did say he was a top expert. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. We're very grateful for your time, mate. And you know, there's an awful lot of stuff in there, like you say. And I guess, you know, because it's a good to have this long run in for people, so they can dig in a bit more deep if they're involved in this world and find out. And if they're not involved in this world, I think, as you said, it's a massive bit of legislation that we all need to be aware of anyway. And I think the bottom line as well is with all this is that if it prevents another Grenfell, this is great, isn't it? You know, so we've got to have that in the back of our mind. It's not just a load of more bureaucracy. It's actually there to save people's lives. So we mustn't forget that.
Julia, I'm not sure how it works in terms of if I send you some information, how you make it available to people, but I'll send you through all of the information that I talked about in the slide. There's about 5 or 6 bits of information there that I'll send through, and if anybody wants them, including the slide deck, send it out.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, if you send it through to me, and I'll just email all the attendees today to save them bombarding me with, I would imagine, a lot of emails asking for the information. I'd just like to remind everyone as well that you'll get your attendance certificate this time tomorrow, and I will upload the presentation onto our YouTube channel probably next week now. So I want to thank Rob for organising and Billy for his great presentation. Thanks for attending, everyone, and hope to see you at the next webinar.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. Cheers, Billy. All the best. Bye-bye now.